We've already heard a bit about the cognitive interview and the costs and benefits of using this technique, but what does a cognitive interview actually involve in practice? Well, the original version of this interview, devised by Geiselman and colleagues and published in 1984, included 4 cognitive mnemonics. These are report everything, mental reinstatement of context, change perspective, and change order. The report everything mnemonic consists of asking witnesses to report everything they can remember, whether it seems trivial or not. This means that witnesses should be encouraged to report partial information they're not sure about, and information that they think the interviewer already knows. Now, this instruction is very important, as you need the witnesses to break the basic communication rule that it's rude to dominate a conversation. You want your witnesses to dominate this interaction. Allowing witnesses to talk freely about everything they remember is an important part of the procedure, as witnesses will typically choose only to recall information that they think might be important for the investigation. It may be that details a witness considers to be irrelevant are actually of value for the investigation. So everything that pops into the witness's mind needs to be reported so that all the information known to the witness is given to the interviewer. Further, because our memories of some aspects of an event actually overlap with other aspects, it can be that some recall, even if it seems irrelevant, may activate other relevant details. Now, during the use of this technique, it is critical that the interviewer does not interrupt the witness while they're recalling. Here it can also be useful for the interviewer to take notes of the relevant information reported, as these can help with the use of other techniques. Griffiths and Milne in 2010 gave an example of how this instruction could be worded. Their example went like this.
I was not present at the car park this morning, so I need you to tell me everything that you can remember, even the things that appear trivial, unimportant, or that you cannot recall completely. Even the smallest pieces of information may help the investigation. Everything that pops into your mind, you just let me know, even if you think we already know them. Please take your time and tell me everything you remember.
The next mnemonic is the mental reinstatement of context, and this consists of asking witnesses to mentally recreate the event they're trying to recall. Witnesses are encouraged to recreate the physiological, cognitive, and emotional states that were present at the time of the event. This technique is based on the premise suggested by Tolving and Thompson in 1973 that memory retrieval is more efficient when the context of the original event is recreated through recall. As Memon in 2006 noted, the task of mentally recreating the context is not easy, and so the interviewer needs to assist the witness by giving an instruction that restates the context that they experienced when they witnessed the events. This method consists of a number of linked instructions delivered with a pause between each, which allows the witness to recreate the context as required. For example, Griffiths and Milne in 2010 suggested the following instructions for a witness who was reported seeing a man from a neighbour's house as she left to go shopping.
Close your eyes. Think back to that day. Picture the house in your head. Get a clear picture of that house in your mind. Think about all the objects that were there on that day. Think about all the colours you remember seeing. Think about all the sounds that you can remember hearing. Think about how you were feeling. Think about what you were going to do. Then, when you're ready and you have a clear picture in your mind, tell me everything you remember in your own time and in your own pace. You have as long as you want.
Note that the context reinstatement instruction can take some time to deliver, as a pause should be taken between each mini segment, as you want the witness to have the opportunity to rebuild that image or feeling that you're asking them to think about. Milne in 2004 also recommended that the statements are given in the past tense as opposed to the present. It can be helpful to ask the witness to look in the floor or a blank space in the interview room, or to close their eyes to assist concentration if they feel comfortable doing this. The idea behind this is that doing so will help the witness to focus the retrieval process, and it will stop any distractions that would otherwise divert the witness's attention away from the task in hand. Again here, the interviewer should note down the relevant episodes described by the witness during their initial free report in order to go back to fully explore each mental image. Now, this technique is quite difficult to do in practice, both for the interviewer trying to elicit the recall and from the witness trying to remember. Because of this, several alternative procedures have been proposed since the original development of the technique. One of these is the sketch mental reinstatement of context proposed by Dando and colleagues in 2011. In this technique, witnesses are asked to draw the event they witnessed themselves and then use the same sketch to draw what happened. This allows witnesses to initiate their own contextual retrieval cues through drawing the crime scene. Importantly, this technique is also less time-consuming and is free from the interviewer's interference, as it is the witness who directs the context reinstatement task and not the interviewer. It is possible that when using the traditional methodist technique, that an interviewer could inadvertently use some misleading retrieval cues drawn from other witnesses' reports. The third mnemonic is the change perspective component of the cognitive interview. For this, you ask the witness to recall the event from a different perspective. For example, report what another witness who was present would have seen. Here, the interviewer should use the witness's initial free recall to select a better perspective to report. Because a different memory retrieval procedure is used in this technique, the amount of reported information usually increases at this point. And this is often information that is actually peripheral to the central event. It is worth noting that Kebbel and Wagstaff in 1996 and others have raised concerns that this particular technique may confuse the witness or lead to speculation by the witness as they imagine what other people might have seen during the event. So it is critical that when this instruction is used, witnesses are told not to guess and to only report what they would have actually experienced. The final mnemonic from the cognitive interview that we'll talk about is the change order instruction. This is where you ask the witness to make numerous retrieval attempts from different starting points in their account. So, for example, you could ask them to try and recall events in reverse order, starting with the final events. Griffiths and Milne in 2010 suggested that you may give instructions like the following for this to be effective.
I would like you to try something that can sometimes help people remember extra information. I would like you to tell me about the event, but this time backwards. Let's start with the last thing that you remember happening. Now go back to what happened just before that. And now, just before that.
With this technique, overlooked details might be remembered, and we generally see recall accuracy increasing. Griffiths and Milne in 2010 suggested that this might be because witnesses rely on their prior knowledge and schemas when recalling an event in chronological order, and that can influence what they report. Not surprisingly, new information is understood and recalled based on our prior knowledge. This means that you get retrieval that is guided by people's pre-existing scripts about events, and this can result in limited information being recalled, as information that does not fit the script is excluded. This means that witnesses can confuse what they actually saw with their stereotypical ideas of a particular crime. Now, scripts are usually organised in chronological order, and recalling your crime event in another order minimises this problem by reducing the activation of the script. As a consequence, the change order instruction can prompt the retrieval of more inconsistent details that are inconsistent with the stereotypical script for the event. So both the change order and change perspective techniques in the cognitive interview are designed to try and get the witness to recall information that has not yet been recalled. The important question is whether these techniques work. Well, as you heard in the earlier videos, the evidence is pretty convincing. For example, in 1985, Gieselman, Fisher, McKinnon and Holland published the results of a study they conducted comparing the effectiveness of the original cognitive interview with two other interview methods. These were a standard police interview and a hypnosis interview. In this study, 89 undergraduate student participants watched a violent crime film that was used to train officers from the Los Angeles Police Department. 48 hours later, they were interviewed face-to-face by law enforcement officers recruited from agencies in the United States. These officers used one of three interview techniques: a cognitive interview, hypnosis, or a standard interview. In the standard interview condition, witnesses were first asked to describe in their own words what they remembered. Interviewers were then told to use questioning procedures they would normally use, so they would ask specific questions based on the witness's account. In the hypnosis interview condition, participants were asked to describe the film in their own words. The interviewer then performed a hypnosis induction and then asked the witness to restate what they remembered from the film. This was followed by specific questions about the film based on the witness's report. In the cognitive interview condition, interviewers describe the 4 cognitive interview components to each interviewee prior to the interview, and then place a list of the techniques in full view of the witness during the interview as a reference guide. The format of the standard interview was then followed. Now, analysis of the number of correct items generated showed that both the cognitive interview and the hypnosis interviews elicited a greater number of correct bits of information than the control interview, but that recall between the cognitive interview and the hypnosis interview did not differ. The analysis of the number of incorrect items that people recalled and confabulated items did not differ by condition. Now, given legal concerns about the use of hypnosis interview, the authors concluded that the study provided good evidence of the usefulness of the cognitive interview technique for police officers and its superiority when compared with the standard interview procedure. And in fact, between 1984 and 1987, Gieselman and colleagues conducted several empirical research studies that led to the same conclusion. The cognitive interview produced superior outcomes when compared with the standard police interview. However, despite this, after developing the original cognitive interview, Fisher and colleagues in 1987 concluded that police officers conducting real-life interviews often neglected to use elements of interpersonal communication that were important. To address this, Fisher and Gieselman in 1992 layered in communication skills to the cognitive interview to create the enhanced cognitive interview. This resulted in an interview with 9 different phases, each seen as being important to the success of the technique. So, in an enhanced cognitive interview, the opening phase of the interview comprises the greet and rapport phase. Here, the interviewer should introduce themselves by name and personalise the interview. To help reduce the anxiety that a witness might feel, the interviewer can then pose neutral questions that can be answered positively and are not associated with the witnessed event. Ideally, here the interviewer should use open-ended questions to encourage the witness to give elaborate responses, because that is what you need the interviewee to do later in the interview. Rapport is very important when the information that will be discussed is very personal. So the interviewer should show empathy through active listening. Non-verbal behaviour is also important at this stage, and also throughout the whole interview to establish an enhanced rapport. In the second phase, the enhanced cognitive interview, the interviewer creates a context in which the interview will occur. Now, bearing in mind that what the witness is about to be asked to do requires intense concentration, the interviewer really needs to create an environment that is peaceful and where the witness does not feel rushed to give an answer. Here, the interviewer also needs to explicitly transfer control of the interview to the witness. Many witnesses will come into the interview and expect the interviewer to control it. This expectation has to be corrected, and the interviewer needs to make clear that they are there only to facilitate recall. It is the witness's interview, not the interviewer's. At this point, the interviewer should encourage the witness to report everything that they've seen. So in this phase 3, the interviewer initiates a free report, but using the context reinstatement instruction I described before. After the witness has successfully recreated the context, the interviewer should prompt an uninterrupted free report of the witnessed event. In phase 4, the interviewer asks questions based on the free report given by the witness. The interviewer should structure the questioning in the order that the witness remembered. This helps to ensure that the questioning is compatible with the witness's recall. Here again, the report everything instruction should be repeated, and it should be emphasised that it's okay for the witness to say they don't know an answer to a question, or if they don't understand the question being asked. The mini-context reinstatement is used to help the witness to create a mental image of the more specific details of the event. Again, open questions are used to initiate further free recall of a particular segment of the account before further probing or using a closed question. The interviewer should also avoid topic hopping, which is jumping from one topic to another. Each topic should be exhausted before moving to the next. In phase 5, varied retrieval strategies such as reverse order recall and the changed perspective instruction can be used. Before they are used, though, it should be explained to the witness why these methods are being used, as a witness might not be particularly happy being asked multiple times to recall the same thing. Depending on the type of event, the use of each of the 5 different senses can also be used as further retrieval prompts. For example, in an arson case, smell might be highly important, and so you would ask the witness to try and recall what they were smelling at the time. In actual practice, when a witness to a crime is being interviewed, at phase 6, the enhanced cognitive interview will often revert to a more recognisable standard police interview. At this point, information that is important to the investigation but has not been mentioned by the witness may be introduced in order to get the witness's reflection on it. While this is important to the investigation, the introduction of this information may actually lead the witness, which is not desirable. And the information that results after this point may ultimately be of less evidential value. Phase 7 comprises the interviewer's summary of the witness's word to check their own recall for accuracy. Phase 8 is closure, which means the interviewer gradually returns to neutral topics to conclude the interview on a positive note. The interviewer should provide information on what will happen after the interview and answer any questions that the witness has. Finally, phase 9 is the evaluation of the interview with the interviewer's colleagues, which should take place to allow for continued professional development of the police. So, as you can see, in reality, if followed properly, the enhanced cognitive interview is rather a lengthy and complex technique. However, as Griffiths and Milne in 2010 noted, the evidence from lab-based research is convincing in terms of demonstrating the effectiveness of the techniques and has led to the term the cognitive interview superiority effect. In the first empirical investigation of the efficacy of this enhanced cognitive interview, Fisher and colleagues in 1987 compared the original cognitive interview to the enhanced cognitive interview. In this study, undergraduates were interviewed 2 days after watching the Los Angeles Police Department training films that I described earlier, and they were interviewed by officers using either the original cognitive interview or the enhanced cognitive interview. The original cognitive interview used the 4 memory retrieval components that were described to participants at the beginning of their interview, so mental reinstatement of context, report everything, change temporal order and change perspective. The enhanced cognitive interview, in addition to the 4 original components, moved through the phases I just described, using witness-compatible questioning and focus retrieval techniques. The results of this evaluation showed that the enhanced cognitive interview elicited 45% more correct items of information compared with the original cognitive interview. And there were no differences between the 2 interview techniques in the amount of incorrect information recalled. Since then, the enhanced cognitive interview superiority effect has been replicated in many countries such as the USA, England, Australia, Brazil and Portugal, and with many different witnesses, so with children, with adults and with the elderly. The enhanced cognitive interview superiority effect has been seen with different delays between the witnessed event and the interview, ranging from minutes to months, and with different events such as a crime, a traffic accident or a phone call. The effect has also been seen both in lab and field studies. As a result, the enhanced cognitive interview has been widely trained and used by police forces in many countries such as England, Wales and Australia. However, a number of field evaluations have shown that in practice, police officers either do not use or only use certain parts of the enhanced cognitive interview. For example, Kebbel and colleagues in a paper published in 1999 surveyed 96 experienced officers trained in the cognitive interview and found that these officers agreed that certain elements of the cognitive interview were seen as more useful than others and were thought to be used more frequently. The useful techniques were establish rapport, report everything, encourage concentration, witness-compatible questioning, and mental reinstatement of context. Other elements, such as using different temporal orders for recall and the change perspective, were less positively evaluated. And Paolo and colleagues in 2017 noted 3 key criticisms of them. First, the procedures take considerable interviewing time, and time is typically scarce in police investigations. Second, as Bentzi and colleagues in 2011 noted, the procedures typically elicit very limited additional information. And finally, police officers simply see the procedures to be ineffective, time-consuming and difficult to use. Because of this, replacing or removing the change order and change perspective techniques from the enhanced cognitive interview has been discussed. One suggestion has been to ask witnesses for a second retrieval attempt with something called category clustering recall. Here, witnesses are asked to recall one more time everything they can remember about a crime episode, but this time they're asked to organise their recall and speech into broad information categories that are present in almost every crime. So things like person details, object details, location details, action details, conversation details, and sound details, rather than the temporal clusters used within the change order instruction. Paolo and colleagues in 2016 suggest that this technique might be easier for witnesses, as people often naturally or spontaneously encode, organise and recall information in semantic categories, and doing so may trigger other memories, as recording information in one cluster may trigger other memories that are closely related to that cluster. In addition, as this technique only requires the interviewer to be able to explain a simple instruction to the witness, it requires less effort, interference, adjustment and training from the interviewer. Paolo and colleagues in 2016 investigating replacing the change order mnemonic with category clustering recall. In this study, they randomly allocated 66 Portuguese students to one of three conditions. The first was a standard enhanced cognitive interview condition. The second condition used a revised enhanced cognitive interview with category clustering recall instead of the change order technique. And the third condition was a revised enhanced cognitive interview with category clustering recall instead of the change order technique, but with eye closure and additional open-ended follow-up questions. All participants first watched a 3-minute 11-second clip from a 2004 Portuguese television drama called Inspector Max. This recording showed a man armed, walking inside a bank and taking several hostages in order to carry out the robbery. In the clip, the robber verbally and physically interacts with the hostages, with the cashier, and with a police officer who later approaches the robber. 48 hours later, the participants undertook a cognitive interview in line with their allocated condition. Now, all interview protocols included at least 3 of the 4 enhanced cognitive interview cognitive mnemonics: report everything, context restatement, and change order, as well as the social and communicative components described by Fisher and Geiselman in 1992, such as rapport building, transfer of control, appropriate questioning, so if you like, witness compatible questioning, and mental imagery. So, as in the standard enhanced cognitive interviewer, the interviewers first engaged in the greet and rapport procedures before asking participants to recall what they could remember about the video in any order and in the pace they desired. They were reminded to report everything with as much detail as possible. Here, mental reinstatement of context was also used. In the next phase of the study, participants engaged in a second attempt at recall. Those in the enhanced cognitive interview were asked to recall the video in the reverse order. In both conditions with the revised enhanced cognitive interview, participants were instead asked to recall with the aid of category clustering recall. This recall strategy consists of asking participants to recall everything one more time, but organising their recall and speech into information categories. So they were asked to first recall everything they could remember about the objects at the crime scene. Then participants were asked to recall everything they could remember about the location of each person at the crime scene. Following that, participants were asked to focus on and recall the actions that occurred during the crime. Lastly, participants were asked to focus on what they might have heard during the video, and first recall everything they could remember about what people said during the crime, and then everything they could remember about other sounds that they might have heard. In the revised cognitive interview, with eye closure and additional open-ended follow-up questions, participants were asked to close their eyes while performing this task, and participants were asked additional open-ended follow-up questions once they'd finished their recall. Now, in the final phase of the interview, all participants in all conditions were asked to focus one more time on the video and try and report any new details that they could remember. The analysis of the interview showed a significant effect of condition on a number of correct units of information recalled, but no effect of condition on the number of errors or confabulations, those made-up elements, made during the interview. Follow-up tests of the significant effect showed that participants in the enhanced cognitive interview condition recalled fewer correct details than participants in either of the 2 revised enhanced cognitive interview conditions. The recall of correct details did not differ between the 2 revised enhanced cognitive interview conditions. And this was the same when looking at just the recall in the phases that differ between the 2 conditions rather than total recall. Finally, accuracy of recall during the final, that is the 3rd attempt at recall, did not differ significantly between the conditions, suggesting that the use of the revised enhanced cognitive interview with category clustering recall did not impact the number of new correct units of information that the participants were able to recall. The results of this study provide some early suggestion that the use of category clustering recall could be a superior alternative to those parts of the enhanced cognitive interview that are not liked or used by police officers in the field. However, more research using category clustering recall is needed before it can be seen as a viable alternative to the traditional methods used in the enhanced cognitive interview.